The night my son told me to stay home, you're not fun anymore. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the kitchen as the mandolin Clara gave me gleamed untouched on the wall. I'm Oz Riven 58, a retired accountant, quiet mostly. Ever had one comment make you question if it's time to rewrite the whole script? The words hit me harder than I expected, carried on the faint smell of salt drifting in through the open kitchen window. Stay home, Dad. You're not fun anymore. Eamon didn't even look up when he said it, his thumb tapping at his phone, as if those 5 words didn't just take something from me. The harbor breeze rattled the blinds, making them clack like impatient fingers. I sat there staring at the steam rising from my coffee, trying not to let my face give me away. The mandolin on the wall, Clara's gift from years ago, caught the light from the pendant lamp above the table. A thin layer of dust traced its curves like neglect you don't notice until the right angle reveals it. I hadn't played it in months, maybe years. The varnish gleamed as if it knew what was coming, though. There was still no crack yet. Dinner had been one of those silent negotiations where everyone is polite enough to pretend they're happy. Cecily, my daughter-in-law, smiled through most of it, nodding at Eamon's talk about the family trip they were planning for the spring. We'll all head out to the Folly Beach house for a week, maybe 2 if the weather holds, he said, waving his hand like a man who owned the ocean. Then as he scooped another spoonful of roasted vegetables, he looked up just long enough to add, "You should probably sit this one out, Dad. You'll be more comfortable here." I managed a nod, though my throat had gone dry. Comfortable. As if my presence was a wool sweater no one wanted to wear. My fingers trembled against the ceramic mug, leaving a faint ring on the table when I set it down. The laughter that followed Cecily's light and Eamon's careless filled the space where I might have said something. Later, when the house was quiet again, I wandered into the study. The floorboards creaked underfoot, their protest sounding louder than usual. The mandolin waited on its hook, Clara's photograph just beneath it. Her smile, frozen in a decade-old frame, looked younger than I remembered. I ran a finger along the edge of the picture, the glass cold and smooth, and whispered, "Maybe it's time I stopped waiting for an invitation." I found myself at the old roll-top desk, opening drawers that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Property records from years past were still in neat stacks, yellowing but organized like everything else I'd kept since retiring. I pulled one out, held it in the dim light, and slid it into the scanner. The hum of the machine was louder than I liked at midnight. Each page I emailed to myself felt like a quiet defiance, one more step away from the man they assumed I'd become. Harmless, passive, fading. The glow of my phone cut through the room as I drafted a note, my thumb hovering over the screen before I typed. Find statements, track withdrawals. It looked more like an instruction than a plan, but it was enough to make my pulse feel steady again. I closed my eyes, the light still pooling across my face, and let the sound of distant waves through the cracked window lull me towards something like sleep. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel entirely empty. I never thought I'd end up watching my own family like this. Spying feels too harsh a word, but numbers don't bruise you the way words do. They just leave trails neat and undeniable. Trails no one notices until someone like me with too much time and too much memory follows them. The winter air pressed cool against the window panes as I sat in my home office, the hum of the little space heater filling the room. Outside, strands of holiday lights blinked lazily on the neighbor's porch, casting shifting reds and greens on my stacks of files. I brushed dust off the mandolin by the window. Its neck caught the light, revealing the faintest line, like a scratch you only see if you tilt your head just so. A flaw or the start of one. It felt too much like the unease growing in my chest. My desk was a sprawl of papers. Old HOA ledgers, retirement account statements, invoices that smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee. I found myself leaning closer than usual, squinting under the desk lamp. On page 6 of a quarterly summary, a withdrawal stood out in red ink, $50,000, noted as a temporary loan, Cecily's initials scribbled beside it. I read it 3 times, not because I doubted it, but because disbelief is stubborn when it's your own family. Her voice chirped over speakerphone not 5 minutes later, cutting through the heater's buzz. "If we reroute the sponsorship funds, we can cover the festival deposit. Everyone wins, right?" Her tone was breezy, almost cheerful, as if HOA money was a communal slush fund. I muted the call and stared at the ledger again, the faint sound of Clara's mandolin station playing from the radio in the next room. The song It Was One Clara loved made me grip the ledger tighter. I started a routine that night, one I'd repeat until it became muscle memory. Every questionable email got printed, the paper still warm, when I slid it into a manila folder. Copies went to a secure account I set up with timed releases tucked behind layers of passwords. Eamon wouldn't think his father capable of using. I photographed invoices by lamplight, careful to crop out any shadows, the quiet click of the camera, my only witness. Around midnight, a letter from the bank caught my eye, its envelope smudged with a ring of old coffee. It was a polite warning, an overdraft tied to the retirement account overextension in crisp legal phrasing. I folded it along its crease and slid it into Clara's old recipe box, a dented tin with faded roses on the lid. She used to keep sugar packets and handwritten notes in it. Now it would hold evidence silent and out of sight. Then came the contractor bill tucked between ordinary invoices like a splinter in Cleanwood. Luxury deck, Folly Beach property paid directly from the retirement fund. The total at the bottom made my hand tremble as I folded it. Through the thin walls, Clara's favorite melody floated from the radio, a tune I hadn't heard in years. My fingers brushed the recipe box as I placed the bill inside the metal cool, almost grounding. I clicked the lid shut, turned the tiny lock, and leaned back in my chair. The wall clock ticked deliberate and steady, louder now that the house was quiet. Outside, faint pops of fireworks announced New Year's Eve. I whispered one word into the dim room, not sure if it was to Clara, to myself, or to the papers I'd just hidden. Patience. The fireworks kept coming, distant and hollow, as if the world was celebrating a life I wasn't invited to. I stared at the mandolin again, that thin line along its neck, more visible in the flicker of passing headlights. It still played, but something was changing. And so was I. The coffee at Hanley's Diner tasted like ash, but Victor's words cut through the bitterness like a lighthouse beam on a fogged harbor. It had been months since Clara's voice faded from this world, but as he spoke, something in me stirred awake, like the faint hum of that old mandolin string I used to strum just to keep the silence from swallowing me. Hanley's was almost empty that morning, the spring light dimmed by rain, streaking down the big front windows. The pandemic had scared off most of the regulars, leaving the place quieter than I'd ever seen it. A stack of local papers sat by the counter, headlines about curfews and mask orders half hidden under a plate of sugar packets. The cracked vinyl booth across from Victor creaked when I leaned forward, cradling my black coffee like it might warm more than just my hands. Victor looked older than the last time I saw him, 65, shoulders still broad, but stooped a little, like he was finally letting the years weigh him down. His mug was chipped, the kind of imperfection he never bothered replacing. "Oz," he said, his voice low and steady. "Clara would haunt me if I let you roll over while your kids stripped the bones clean." I pushed the stack of papers across the table. Bank letters, printed emails, invoices with numbers circled in my neat, tight hand. His thick fingers flipped through them, eyes narrowing behind scratched lenses. 50 grand here, 40 there. They're bleeding your fund dry under the guise of temporary. You sit on your hands, they'll gut it before you can say probate. The rain drummed harder on the window, drowning out the faint clink of dishes from the kitchen. I felt a pulse in my jaw as I stared past Victor, watching the neon sign outside flicker against puddles on the pavement. "I'm not looking for revenge," I said quietly, "but I'm not ready to be put out to pasture either." Victor tapped the mandolin case leaning beside me. He'd brought it from my car when we met, uninvited but deliberate. Clara wouldn't want that thing collecting dust or you. His knuckle rapped gently on the worn wood, and for a moment I thought I heard the faint echo of Clara humming. Maybe it was just memory, but it caught in my throat. He slid a yellow legal pad across the table, a pen clipped to its cover. "Write it all down, dates, amounts, who said what. If we need to file, we need a story the court can't poke holes through. Keep your head down in the meantime. Smile when they talk about vacations. Don't tip your hand." Glenda, the diner's lone waitress, shuffled by with a pot of coffee. "Top you off, Han?" she asked, her drawl like a porch swing in summer. I nodded, letting the hot stream fill my mug again. The smell of burnt grounds mixed with the damp scent of rain sneaking in each time the door opened. Victor leaned in, lowering his voice. This pandemic lull is a gift in a way. They're distracted, thinking the world's gone upside down. Use that. Build your case while they're busy upgrading their beach palace. I stared at the pad, feeling the weight of the pen in my palm. Clara's photo lived in my wallet, edges frayed from years of folding, but I didn't need to pull it out. I could almost hear her now, not scolding, but nudging me forward the way she did when I hesitated over any hard decision. By the time we stood to leave, the rain had eased to a mist. Victor gave my shoulder a firm squeeze before heading to his truck. I slid the mandolin case onto the passenger seat of my old Buick, the leather handle rough against my palm. As I drove home along the slick highway, the wipers squeaking in slow rhythm, my eyes kept flicking to that hairline crack in the wood. The instrument still held together, still played if coaxed, but like me, it couldn't take too many more silent knocks. When I pulled into my driveway, the drizzle picked up again, tapping on the windshield like fingers keeping time. I sat there for a long moment, my hand resting on the mandolin case, before cutting the engine. There was work to do, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like furniture in my own life. One string snapped mid-chord, the twang so sudden and sharp, it made me flinch, like hearing a bone break in a quiet room. The sound lingered longer than it should have, ringing through the living room, as if mocking the hush of a world still held under the pandemic's grip. I sat there on the edge of the old couch, Clara's mandolin resting heavy on my lap, its glossy surface now marred by that single coiled end of broken wire, dangling like a loose nerve. The street outside was muffled as it had been for months. No cars rolling by, no porch conversations, just the occasional rustle of leaves and the far-off hum of a late bus. The TV played softly in the corner, news anchors droning about case numbers and shifting mandates, their voices filtered through a mask of static. The faint rubber and alcohol scent of sanitizer clung to everything, even the wood of the mandolin. I looked down at my fingers still curved from the chord I never finished, and felt the ache in my knuckles where age and nerves met. I didn't replace the string, not yet. Instead, I leaned the instrument against the chair, silent and incomplete, as I crossed to my desk. The corkboard above it was already cluttered with bank letters, printed emails, and notes in my cramped handwriting. Victor's voice came through the phone, propped against a jar of pens, steady and grounding the way Clara's used to be when I spiraled. "Bank wants a clean timeline," he said. I could hear him flipping through papers on his end. Every withdrawal, every invoice dated and cross-checked. And make sure to photograph the originals. If this goes to court, copies won't cut it alone. I slid another faded receipt under the desk lamp. My hand trembled as I angled the camera, catching the way the light bounced off the thin paper. The flash reflected off the silver of my wedding band still on my finger, though Clara had been gone 2 years. I thought about slipping it off once early on, but the imprint it left on my skin felt more honest than the bare hand ever would. Victor cleared his throat. "Oz, don't let your temper write for you. You can send the letter when the time's right, but for now, it's just leverage. Draft it, keep it. Let them hang themselves with their own rope first." The printer whirred beside me, spitting out the timeline I'd pieced together from months of late-night digging withdrawals for temporary loans. Invoices for deck upgrades. A contractor bill paid straight from my retirement fund. I pinned the fresh sheet beneath Clara's smiling photo on the corkboard, the pushpin sinking into the soft cork with a soft thunk. Her eyes, caught mid-laugh in that snapshot from 1998, seemed to meet mine with the same calm encouragement she'd always given me when I doubted myself. On the desk, the letter to Eamon lay half-written in my looping script. I'd started with Son, crossed it out, replaced it with Eamon, and left the rest in limbo. Every time I tried to finish, my chest tightened, not with anger, but with the weight of everything unsaid. I folded it neatly and slid it into Clara's old recipe box, the one that now hid more documents than recipes. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the harbor, the storm outside growing bold. I crossed back to the mandolin and lifted it by the neck, running my thumb over the jagged end of the snap string. The instrument felt lighter now, diminished somehow, like a voice gone hoarse. I hung it back on the wall, its broken string catching a sliver of lamplight as it swayed gently. The wind picked up, rattling the window pane. I stood there a long while, staring at that mute instrument, feeling the quiet between each distant clap of thunder. The house felt smaller with the TV muted the news. A low whisper I could no longer stand. I whispered almost to Clara. Almost to myself. Almost there. The words didn't echo, just settled into the dim corners of the room, carried by the faint hum of the printer still cooling down behind me. Outside, another rumble of thunder answered, rolling long and low, as if the storm itself was taking sides. The beach house felt foreign the moment I stepped through the doorway, as though I were trespassing on a life I once thought I'd be part of forever. The boards creaked under my shoes, carrying the sound up through the hollow rafters and down the long, echoing hallway. Outside, the off-season wind howled, faintly rattling one of the loose shutters against the clapboard siding. I lingered in the entryway longer than I should have, my coat collar turned up, watching a young couple step eagerly through the living room as Ms. Daring, the realtor, chirped about ocean views and a rare market opportunity. I stayed silent, my hands tucked into my pockets, while the smell of stale salt and sun-bleached wood filled the air. This place had been built for summer laughter, for Clara's humming, while she brewed morning coffee for Eamon and Cecily's plans to remodel the deck that had never materialized. I noticed the loose step on the staircase, something Eamon promised he'd fix last July, and the peeling paint along the kitchen trim. The young woman in the touring couple ran her fingertips along the countertop Cecily had handpicked 2 years ago, smiling as if she could already picture her own life staged here. I caught the faint tinny sound of Clara's sea glass wind chime outside. A single strand of glass had broken loose, the oval beads clinking erratically against one another as the breeze threaded through. The chime still played, but unevenly, like a song coming apart at its center. Ms. Daring's heels tapped briskly against the wooden floors as she pointed out the view from the second-story deck, her voice bright, almost too bright for the gray day. "They're serious buyers," she whispered when she passed me near the hallway, her tablet tucked under one arm. "Full price offer pending inspection. This market, things are moving fast. You're in good hands." Her efficiency barely registered. My eyes drifted over the living room again to the framed photo still on the mantel, Clara and me, both younger, laughing with Eamon at a cookout on this very porch. No one had thought to pack it. Maybe no one wanted to claim it. My phone buzzed in my pocket as the couple admired the upstairs bathroom. Eamon's name lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering, walking out onto the covered porch where the wind cut the air clean. "Dad, what the hell is this?" His voice wasn't even trying for civility. I just saw listing our house on the market. Without a word, I let the sound of the waves fill the pause between us, the surf low and steady. "It was in my name," I said, my voice even almost quiet. "Always has been." There was nothing but static on the other end for a few seconds. Eamon's sharp intake of breath, a faint click like he'd started to speak but couldn't find words. Then the line went dead. No goodbye, no warning, just silence. I stood there a while, looking down at the weathered planks beneath my shoes. A strand of seagrass blew across the porch and caught on my boot before the wind claimed it again. Somewhere behind me, Ms. Daring called my name, asking if I wanted to review the offer before heading out. I nodded without turning, my gaze still fixed on the horizon, where the ocean blurred into the gray sky. Back home, dusk had already slipped across the neighborhood. The street lamps buzzed faintly against the early spring chill. I pushed open the front door, dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the entryway, and froze. The mandolin case, which had hung securely on its hook for years, lay on the floor near the bookcase. The latch had sprung open, the broken string poking out like a vein, the case scuffed where it must have hit the hardwood. No draft, no disturbance I could see, just the still hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the faint tap of a branch against the window pane. I crouched, running my fingers along the case's dent, feeling the rough edge where the leather had frayed. The house felt heavier, the silence pressing close, as if waiting for me to admit something aloud. I closed the latch carefully, set the case upright, and leaned it against the wall. My laptop screen glowed softly from the kitchen table. the draft contract still open, the cursor blinking on the seller's line, where my name was typed in black and final. The scent of the beach air still clung to my coat, and somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's wind chime rang in the cold irregular like Clara's had. For the first time that day, I let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The quiet wasn't victory, not exactly. It was the kind of quiet you get when a storm is gathering just beyond the horizon. The ceiling fans above us wobbled with each slow spin, their hum mingling with the chorus of restless feet on linoleum. It was the kind of summer night in Charleston where the air stuck to your shirt thick with humidity, and even paper seemed to sweat, meeting agendas curling at the corners as if they wanted to escape. I sat 3 rows back at the community center, my name printed in bold on the flyer someone had tacked to the corkboard. Oz Riven Treasurer Emeritus, a title no one had bothered to confirm with me. They'd assumed I was done with all this, that I preferred to fade into the background like some half-forgotten file in a dusty cabinet. Cecily stood at the front of the room, poised behind the metal lectern, her voice smooth, confident. She wore a pale blue blazer, the kind that caught the fluorescent light just so, making her look unflappable. The spring festival exceeded expectations, she said, clicking through slides that displayed smiling families and tidy expense bars. Her manicured finger rested on the clicker like a conductor's baton, every beat controlled. The room was full, residents fanning themselves with newsletters. HOA board members nodding along, though their eyes drifted now and then toward the snack table set with sweating pitchers of lemonade. I glanced toward the back corner where Victor sat, arms crossed, his old leather briefcase by his feet. He didn't nod or smile. He just gave me that steady look he'd worn at Hanley's diner months ago, the one that told me I could do this without turning it into a brawl. Cecily clicked to a New Slide Festival account summary. The neat columns showed tidy totals, but one line glared like a bruise: $48,000 labeled miscellaneous services with no vendor listed. My fingers tightened around the bent paperclip I'd been idly twisting in my pocket. The metal dug into my thumb, sharp enough to keep me steady. I raised my hand, my voice calm, when she finally acknowledged me. Could you elaborate on that line item? The $48,000 under festival account. I didn't see any supporting documents in the monthly reports. A few heads turned. A bead of sweat traced down my temple, not from nerves, but from the thick air and the faint heat of the spotlight over Cecily's lectern. Her smile flickered, but she kept her tone even. Those are deferred vendor costs, she said. It's all in the process of reconciliation. Nothing unusual. Victor stood slowly from the back and made his way forward, a manila folder in hand. He didn't speak as he passed it to me. He simply gave a single nod. I flipped it open, the weight of the papers grounding me. Check copies, dated receipts, and printed emails, all bearing Cecily's signature, some even time-stamped late at night when she thought no one was watching. I slid the top document under the projector lens. The faint smell of warm plastic and dust filled the air as the machine whirred to life, casting the black and white copies onto the pull-down screen. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the board members, a man in a sweat-stained polo, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. These show funds transferred directly to a personal account, he said, voice low but caring. His eyes darted to Cecily, who stood frozen, her polished calm now cracking at the edges. She cleared her throat, tried to speak, but her words stumbled over themselves. This is being taken out of context. These were temporary holds for coordination. Another board member, a sharp-eyed woman with a yellow legal pad, interrupted. I think we should call for a vote on temporary suspension pending audit. The residents deserve clarity before the next fiscal cycle. Her pen tapped the pad, each rap echoing louder than Cecily's faltering voice. The fans overhead kept turning unbothered, their shadows circling on the ceiling like a slow clock. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply stood there, hands resting lightly on the edge of the projector cart, the cool metal grounding me as the murmurs swelled into agreement. When the meeting adjourned, the room thinned quickly. Papers rustled, chairs scraped, and the sticky heat of the day finally gave way to the cool relief of the hallway's air conditioning. Victor walked beside me as we stepped into the quiet night, the sound of cicadas rising in the trees. He didn't clap me on the back or raise his voice. He just leaned in slightly and said, "You won without raising your voice once. I exhaled the tension, leaving me with the warm air. In the distance, I thought of the mandolin back home, its string replaced resting quietly in its case by the wall. I hadn't touched it yet, not ready to hear its song. But for the first time in months, I felt like maybe when I did, it might sound whole again. The morning light came in soft and golden, slipping past the edges of the kitchen curtains and catching on the dust motes that hovered like lazy fireflies. Thanksgiving in Charleston has a way of smelling like two things at once: salt from the nearby marsh and something sweet from an oven that's been warming since dawn. I slid Clara's old recipe card back into its box, though I didn't really need it anymore. Her pumpkin bread was muscle memory now. The batter's scent, nutmeg and brown sugar, filled the house as the oven ticked softly, metal expanding with the heat. The mandolin lay across the table, strings still slack, its varnish freshly wiped clean. I hadn't touched it since that last stormy night, when it hung silent with its broken string, a mute witness to all I thought I'd lost. Today, though, with no one coming by, not a son, not a daughter-in-law, I tightened the pegs one by one. Each new string gave a low hum when plucked, tentative but whole. It wasn't for them. It was because I finally wanted to hear it sing for me. The doorbell rang just as I finished tying the last string's end. Victor stepped in, shaking off the November chill, a mason jar of sweet tea in one hand and a bemused grin on his face. "You really cooked?" he asked, lifting the lid on the roasting pan without waiting for an answer. The smell of roasted vegetables escaped, mingling with the bread's warmth. "You're a better host when you're not trying to please anyone." I poured him a glass of tea, the ice clinking against the jar. "Don't tell anyone, but I even cleaned the good plates," I said. My voice came out lighter than I expected, almost playful. He clinked his glass against mine, his rough lawyer's hands oddly gentle. To quiet victories, he toasted. "And to that scholarship fund we talked about, the one for kids who can't afford music lessons." He nodded toward the mandolin on the table. Clara would have approved. Later, while the bread cooled and the light outside faded into the soft blues of a coastal evening, my phone buzzed. Eamon's name glowed on the screen. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity, maybe kindness, won out. His voice was hesitant, as if each word had to be cleared through a checkpoint before leaving his mouth. "Dad, we've been wrong. Cecily and we'd like you to come for Christmas. Mom would have liked that." I leaned against the counter, fingers tracing the worn edge of Clara's recipe box. "Tell me that in person," I said softly, not unkindly. "Then we'll see." Before he could stumble into more apologies, I ended the call, the silence settling back into the house like a familiar quilt. When Victor left, carrying a wrapped loaf for his wife, I returned to the mandolin. I tied a small paper tag to its case, a habit Clara started whenever she took it to gigs, back when weekends smelled like beer halls and sea air. The tag read in my shaky handwriting, "Used, loved, still playing." The new strings rang clear when I strummed a chord. Outside, the evening breeze carried the faint sound to the mossy oaks lining the street. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty. It felt lived in. They told me Harmony Trust sounded like something off a greeting card, too sentimental for a grant fund. I told them Clara would have rolled her eyes, shrugged, and said, "If it helps kids play a few notes or fix a leaky faucet, call it whatever you want." That usually ended the debate. The Marina Park was alive in a way Charleston rarely feels in early spring. The breeze off the water carried hints of salt and honeysuckle, and kids darted between the vendor stalls like minnows. A local trio strummed soft folk tunes near the gazebo, their chords weaving into the background hum of conversation and gulls. I stood by the folding table with our name, Clara's name, printed in deep blue across a vinyl banner. Beneath it, neat stacks of flyers described the scholarship's lessons for music stipends for trade apprenticeships, chances Clara would have championed. I ran a finger along the edge of one flyer, careful not to smudge the lemonade cup ring already marking it. Victor sat off to the side in a battered lawn chair, arms crossed, watching like a proud uncle who'd never admit to being sentimental. Trisha from the HOA fussed with the ribbon for the ceremonial, cutting her clipboard covered in notes and tiny smudges of pen ink. And there, near the stage, Eamon and Cecily stood together, subdued but present. Cecily kept adjusting her sunglasses, even in the shade. Eamon held his hands in his pockets, the posture of someone both apologetic and out of practice at it. Neither of them said much, but when they caught my eye, there was no heat, no lingering storm. Just a shared acknowledgement that we'd all survived something bruising. The ceremony itself was brief, as these things should be. Trisha gave a short speech about community. I muttered something about Clara's belief in second chances, and the ribbon fell away with a snip. The applause felt modest but genuine. A reporter from the local paper snapped photos, one of which I'm sure will make me look older than I feel. That's fine, I am older, just lighter. After the ribbon, a little boy wandered over to the display table. His fingers, sticky from some nearby snow cone, hovered over the mandolin I'd brought mostly as a prop. He plucked a string by accident, just a single clear note that hung in the air like a held breath. He looked up, eyes wide. "Were you famous or something?" he asked. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from deep in the chest, not out of habit. "Only in the family, kid," I said, handing him a napkin for his hands. And that was a long time ago. As the crowd thinned and the sun dipped low enough to bathe the magnolia trees in a soft glow, I packed the mandolin back into its case. The new strings still felt firm under my fingertips, alive and willing. Eamon approached quietly, murmured a thank you I didn't need to hear, but appreciated anyway. Cecily gave a polite nod. No grand reconciliations, no sweeping hugs, just a peace we could all live with. The walk home was short-lined with blooming magnolias and the faint calls of gulls finding their roosts for the night. The air was warm enough to skip the jacket, so I let the sun settle on my shoulders, the mandolin case swinging lightly in my hand. Each step felt unburdened, like maybe, just maybe, I'd finally figured out how to live in the spaces Clara left behind. Without bitterness, without permission, but not alone either. The house waited quiet and sunlit as the last chords from the marina drifted away on the breeze. For once, I didn't feel like I needed to fill the silence. The sun was fading behind the magnolias as I set the mandolin new string snug and bright on the porch railing, letting it hum with the evening breeze. Funny how a thing can break then sound sweeter once you take the time to fix it. I've learned that setting firm boundaries doesn't have to mean closing doors. Sometimes bridges need to sway before we know which ones are worth shoring up. For anyone facing layoffs, broken ties, or the losses that leave the house too quiet, know this: there's still music waiting, even if you have to restring it yourself. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share your story, or let this be a nudge to start tuning your own.